Back at State Farm Stadium, and how about this? The team back in full pads just a couple of days ahead of the second preseason game when the Cardinals host the Raiders here at State Farm Stadium. As we welcome you to continuing coverage of Cards Camp 2019, a special edition of Cards Cover 2. Craig Grialou alongside Mike Jurecki. And yes, this is the last open practice before that second preseason game, and certainly a lot to look forward to, and some interesting news from Cliff Kingsbury earlier this morning. And, of course, number one is the fact that we're going to see more of Kyler Murray. Not exactly sure how much more, but Kingsbury did say, and I quote, definitely more than one series.
So we're going to get two.
Probably.
If I gave you 2.5, would you take the over or under?
Well, what would you consider a half? A 3 and out?
No,
I don't want to see a 3 and out.
No, like series, like 2.5, 3 series.
Yeah, you can't do a half a series. You're not going to pull a mid-series.
Well, it'd be, for odds, you got to go over or under.
I got you. Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, that's a good way to put it. I think I would go the under.
Me too.
I prefer the over, but I think I might have to go the under.
And we don't know anything, so I mean, it's not like we're sitting here playing possum. Again, I think I've seen enough. I know he's a rookie, but I just don't want him to take hits. I know he's going to take hits. Obviously, he's going to protect his body, but ideally, you like to see some of these receivers step up. We're going to get into that, but I want him out there with the starters. But again, maybe 2 possessions if they go on a nice long drive and you punch it in for a touchdown. But he did say he's going to play more than one series, so we'll go with what he said during the press conference.
You said you've seen enough, and to a certain extent I agree with you, but I haven't seen enough because it's so exciting and it's so much fun to watch. Yet give Brett Hundley credit for what he was able to do to finish off that first half against the Chargers. But no, I get what you're saying. It's about week 1, not about these preseason games.
And when I say we've seen enough, don't get me wrong, he's a rookie, but I've detailed this over the course of the last couple of months. He knows this offense just as well as the head coach. We're ahead of the game. Now, when it comes to week 1, we're going to see. Yesterday we saw 2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and a running back. Okay.
Also saw him a little bit under center as well.
Under center,
at least
right?
Once that I saw.
And I think he's going to be in the shotgun over 90%. So, what I'm getting at is, we haven't seen nothing yet. Bachman overdrive, right?
Absolutely. Kingsbury, with regards to that second preseason game, did say that later this week they are going to focus a little bit on the Raiders and what they do, but, quote, not a ton, but enough to go out there and be able to execute at a high level. They did not do any game planning whatsoever with the Chargers, and for good reason. But as you kind of get closer and closer to week 1, it is part of the week leading into that Sunday. So you want to get a familiar idea of, okay, how do we attack that week's opponent? And this week we'll kind of start that process.
And I think Vance Joseph, obviously with the conversation with the head coach, is throwing a lot at Kyler Murray. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say he's throwing interceptions every day. Now, you got to go back and look how many happened in 11-on-11, how many happened on 7-on-7. I mean, every quarterback throws interceptions in practice, and he's taking chances, and he's willing to throw to Patrick Peterson. And it sounds like Kingsbury's like, we may want to go to a different spot, but he continues to throw that way. So that's part of the process. But, for the most part, it's just one of these situations, I think, Craig, where I look at rookies besides Murray, first and second year players. These guys need to play. That's why it's imperative to have 4 preseason games, because we go from the preseason to the regular season, and the speed of the game and the physicality gets ramped up. Now, you mentioned the Raiders. They have a huge offensive line. They have a first-round running back from Alabama. Okay, they had 3 first-round picks, Josh Jacobs. I got to think they're going to try to run the ball, utilize a little play action with Derek Carr, but this is another good test. And the Cardinals, they gave up a ton of yards, and a lot of yards were after contact. So they got to make improvements. I don't care who's playing in the game.
Grayson, let's slide over. We'll get back to the quarterback and wide receiver talk, but the defensive line right now working with Marcus Robertson. And how about this? Defensive lineman tip drill. Moments ago, it was the defensive backs, but now we're seeing the D linemen kind of figure out who has the best hands. And one of those defensive linemen down there, again, because of the depth or lack thereof at defensive line, that Kingsbury brought up this morning that could have a prominent role in what this defense wants to do, specifically along the line, is Terrell Mcclain. One of the few guys that does have a little bit of a resume, and someone now, because of the Darius Philon situation, who is not with the team anymore, but McClain is another name out there, along with the Zach Allen, Rodney Gunter, Corey Peters, that all of a sudden pay attention to number 90, Terrell Mcclain.
Yeah, and just looking at the roster right now, I got to think they're going to add a guy or two. And, right now, guys are coming and going. I call those guys Jags, just a guy. Doesn't mean they can't make the roster, but you're just looking for bodies right now. So I got to think they're going to be active when it comes to the first waiver claim. And just to give numbers to our listeners, over the last 5 years, whoever has the first waiver claim after the teams make the 53-man roster, 4 to 7 players average per year. So let's just say 5 or 6. So when the Cardinals make their 53-man roster, we could see 4, 5, 6 moves, and I think that's where they're going to have to address some of these needs. Now, granted, there are some street free agents the Cardinals are interested in. Example would be Michael Crabtree. Don't know where they are in the negotiations there. I'm sure he's waiting for more money, maybe an injury. So, again, there are street free agents out there, but I think they're really waiting for that first wave of teams going from 90 to 53, where there's going to be a plethora of players available.
All right, now let's slide back to the wide receivers, and I think we just missed it, and you saw it and started laughing, but Vinny Del Negro, the former NC State grad, and once upon a time former Phoenix Suns player, former Los Angeles Clippers head coach, down there with general manager Steve Keim, and what do we call Adrian Wilson again? Just Mr. Everything? I know he's got an official title, the director of scouting. Pro scouting? Just scouting. All
player
scouting.
Personnel.
A-Dub?
Yeah, he's got
he does everything.
He does everything.
Anyway, those three.
He's an advanced scout,
all
but he has a
NC
different
State
title.
grads, and as the wide receivers were working, I believe we saw our first Larry Fitzgerald tackle of 2019 as Del Negro went down to the ground, courtesy number 11. He always gets somebody in training camp, and today it was Vinny Del Negro.
And you knew that Keim and A-Dub obviously knew it was coming, and they probably didn't give him a heads up. And that's the NC State connection right now, those three guys.
All right, let's focus on the teammates of one Larry Fitzgerald, and specifically the 3 rookie wide receivers. Andy Isabella, who once again is back practicing. He looks to be full go after missing some time with the knee injury. And then you've got Hakeem Butler and Keyshawn Johnson. No question, Johnson is head and shoulders ahead of those other two. And Kingsbury asked this morning, have all 3 wide receivers shown enough to make this team? Kingsbury paused, then answered, we have 3 more weeks to figure that out. There's a good mix there. We've liked what we've seen so far, but it certainly does right now that if you look at those 3, it's Keyshawn Johnson, it's Andy Isabella, and then it's Hakeem Butler, who yesterday was out on the field early working with Jerry Sullivan on some route running. So a little bit more of a project, but certainly something to pay attention to as we get closer to that mandatory 53-man cut.
Well, when you draft a guy 62nd overall, he's going to be active on game day. Now, obviously, Keyshawn Johnson has exceeded expectations, but I got to give the Cardinals credit. They thought he was one of the better route runners in the entire draft. According to Kingsbury, he was the 2nd best route runner. They've maintained that. Hakeem Butler, I think he's a project from a standpoint of he's got a lot of learning to do. And the reason why he was out here is because he's having a hard time getting off press coverage. And if you don't get off press coverage, you don't get separation. So I think he's going to have to show something in the preseason. I do think he is a guy that could make the roster, but I don't think he's going to be active on game day. The Cardinals will have to make a decision because when they drafted these 3 guys this year, Craig, it was all about the future of Kyler Murray. So we just can't focus on this year, even though they have to have some guys step up. This is about 2nd and 3rd year. And I like what Andy Isabella has done since he's returned. I did ask Kingsbury, does he see the explosion? He said he was off to a good start, then he got injured, but he expects that. And I think it's important that Isabella carries this over to the Raiders game on Thursday night.
And you want those guys, that draft class, and even last year's draft class, to grow together. And that's why some people believe that maybe Mason Cole is a better fit as your starting center as opposed to A.Q. Shipley. Of course, Cole right now working at left guard with Justin Pugh out. Quick note on Pugh, he will not play this week, but the team is hopeful that he'll be able to play in the Minnesota game, that 3rd preseason game next week. a week from Saturday, so we'll have to keep an eye on that injury situation. But certainly wide receivers, once again, in the spotlight this week against the Raiders.
Yeah, and getting back to Pugh, just to piggyback on what you said, I think it's important because, obviously they're counting on him to be a starter. Obviously they do have some depth in Mason Cole, and he can back up both guard and center, but for Pugh to get out there and just kind of knock some of the rust off, he's got to get back in football shape, but they are counting on him, and if he's healthy enough, I think he'll be the starter in week 1.
Let's take a look at the cornerbacks, and that was a discussion point this morning, and in particular, Robert Alford, because, and you've been here every single practice, MJ, but the Robert Alford, Damiere Byrd one-on-one battles are a lot of fun to watch. They make each other better. They did mix it up earlier in camp, but that's a lot of fun, and Alford is certainly looking forward to being the guy, because Patrick Peterson will be leaving here in a little bit, and we're not going to see him until October 20th when the Cardinals go play at the New York Giants.
Yeah, Cliff mentioned today, starting next week, they're going to roll out Robert Alford, Tremaine Brock, and Byron Murphy. He did not rule out Murphy as an outside guy. Brock has more experience in the slot. He prefers to play in the slot, but he's going to do what's best for the team. I always think with a rookie and Murphy, who's very athletic, he's going to play on special teams, so he'll be active, is maybe you can hide him a little bit playing inside versus the outside. But they like those 3 guys. Obviously, they like Murphy enough to where they had other options at 33. He was ranked very high on their board. They selected him. He's going to be the future corner, so it'll be interesting. But, on paper, I would look ahead. And, again, if I had my preference, I would keep him inside and Brock and Alford. But I think it was important for them to show what it's going to look like in Week 7 when Patrick's healthy. I think you had to say, okay, this is who we are in Week 7. But now we get to next week, 2 preseason games left. I think you got to go with what you're going to have the first 6 weeks.
And I think Alford is really looking forward to this opportunity because as we've talked about him and what happened to him in Atlanta, specifically last season, a down year. He played on a high ankle sprain, probably should not have played, but wanted to be out there with his teammates. So maybe he has something to prove, and now the spotlight will be on him and him alone as far as that number 1 guy against the other team's number 1 receiver, at least for the first 6 games before Patrick Peterson comes back.
Well, and this team is going to play man-to-man press. So Cliff was asked today, is he going to travel? Meaning, is he going to take the number 1 wide receiver when he breaks the huddle? He said it's all going to be based on matchups and obviously opponents. So we don't know for sure, but we know when Pat P gets back, he's going to travel. He's going to cover that number 1 wide receiver.
And Kingsbury earlier today did mention that we're going to see a little bit less of Peterson, maybe not this week, but those last 2 preseason games because, one, they know what Peterson is able to do, and when you're not around those first 6 games, there's no reason to give you any more rest because they want to see, outside of Murphy and Brock, who might those other corners be, because with Peterson on that suspension for 6 games, he does not count towards the 53-man roster, so you almost have a bonus roster spot, if you will. Peterson will be on the team, but not counting at that 53.
Yeah, and that's interesting to me because how many DBs do they keep? Is 9? Do you go 5 safeties? Because guys are going to play on special teams, and you drafted 2 guys, and Deontay Thompson and Jalen Thompson and Rudy Ford. I think Rudy Ford actually has improved as a safety, but we all know he's cutting his teeth on special teams. So I would say right now the top 4 corners without Peterson would be Alford, Brock, Murphy, and Chris Jones. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, especially because I really like what Jones has done when given the opportunity, taking advantage of those reps. And
he's made plays.
Yeah, and Josh Shaw is another guy as a safety position who's made plays, but right now he's dealing with a shoulder injury that could cost him a week or 2.
And this team, and a lot of teams focus on position flexibility. He's more of a free safety, but he can play in the slot, he can play on the outside. So again, that's a guy that, a utility guy, he's going to have to play on teams if he's going to be active on game day, but first he's got to make the roster. And he's going to be about 2 weeks with the shoulder injury, so hopefully he's able to come back and show enough to secure a roster spot.
You're watching continuing coverage of Cards Camp 2019, a special edition of Cards Cover 2 here at State Farm Stadium. Craig Grialou and Mike Jurecki as we continue and focus on the defense and moving over to the defensive line and what they are doing on the lower field with defensive line coach Chris Akoff and Zach Allen. I know we spoke a lot about him yesterday because now all of a sudden, instead of a rotation guy, he becomes a starter. A rookie out of Boston College who was very productive at Boston College, but in just watching him in one-on-one pass rush drills against the offensive line, when the pads come on, you're able to do a little bit more with regard to the physicality, and it's not so much his physicality, but how quick off the line of scrimmage he is when the ball is snapped, and he looked very, very good. A speed rush, beating both Mason Cole and Parker Enger yesterday, not on back-to-back reps, but during that entire drill. And so far, there have been very few offensive linemen on this team that can handle the quickness, that first step that Allen brings. Yeah,
and go back to the first time they were in pads. I mean, he kind of blew up Justin Pugh. He had him on roller skates. Yeah, I love his size, 285 pounds. He's not a guy that's going to say a whole lot in the media. I mean, obviously he's a guy that was very productive in college, 100 tackles his last season, which is unusual for a defensive lineman to get that kind of production. And the Cardinals really had him ranked high on their board. The thought was he'd be a rotation guy, but I think by maybe midseason he could have been a starter. But obviously the situation with Darius Philon, that's going to hurt them on the field because they just don't have the depth, and that's what I was talking about earlier. I think we're going to have to wait to see who's available when we get past that fourth preseason game. But you mentioned McClain, Michael Dogby, another draft pick. He's got a physicality part to him. He don't really take any BS from anybody. So, right now I think numbers-wise, I don't know if that sixth and seventh guy is on this team right now.
Well, you do have an open roster spot still with this team. You've got 89. You can have as many as 90 here in training camp. Allen didn't see a lot of time.
6 snaps.
Yeah, did not see a lot of time.
That tells me they know what they have in them.
Exactly. So
you've seen enough.
You'll see him a little bit more coming up this week against the Raiders, but someone they're very high on, and of course you don't draft someone that high if you're not high on him, but certainly much like we saw when Rodney Gunter was a rookie, someone who's going to be a rotation guy, and then Corey Peters suffers an Achilles injury during training camp, and all of a sudden Gunter becomes the man in the spotlight and plays the entire season as a starter. So not saying that right now about Zach Allen, but at least he has shown right now that he is the guy. Now it's up to him to prove that he can do it every single Sunday.
Well, when we talk about next man up, I mean, Darius Philon obviously was productive throughout his career. His snap count went up. They wanted to retain him. But I don't know if there's a huge drop-off. Experience-wise, yes, there's a drop-off. But physicality, now Darius Philon was going to bring a little bit of anger to this team, and we probably shouldn't talk about it anymore because he's not here. But I think Allen is a guy that he kind of reminds me of Kyle Vanden Bosch, and we're going to have Kyle on throughout the course of the season. And I'm curious to pick his brain on what he sees from him and how he can win some one-on-one matchups. But I really like his size, Craig, 285 pounds. And you're right. I don't know if he's fine-tuned his technique, but the explosion that he gets off the ball, he puts these linemen on roller skates.
Seeing a lot of players on the field here this morning that had a veteran day off yesterday. Larry Fitzgerald back in action. Chandler Jones, Patrick Peterson. Do not see right tackle Marcus Gilbert on the field, so perhaps maybe an injury concern with him as the Cardinals get into advanced stages of preparing for their second preseason game with the Raiders coming to town on Thursday. That is a 5 o'clock kickoff on Thursday, and a reminder for fans coming to State Farm Stadium, no paper tickets. Please download the Cardinals mobile app and set up an account, because everything now in 2019 is digital, not just with the Cardinals, but all 32 NFL teams. Go to azcardinals.com for more information, but it's imperative that you download that app ahead of time. Don't wait until you get to State Farm Stadium.
Now, the good news is you can go to azcardinals.com. All the information's on there. It's really easy. I know people, they don't like change. I get that, but this is the future. It's going on with 6 teams in the NFL last year. It's NFL sanctioned by all 32 clubs this year. The NBA has mobile apps. Now, the good news is if you're still not totally tuned in, they have tents at each entrance that are willing to help you. So this is the last preseason game. So in other words, we got to figure it out before we get the opener. We don't want anybody outside with a paperless ticket because you're not getting in the stadium at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, coverage on the Arizona Cardinals radio network begins at 1:30. Dave Pasch, Ron Wolfley, Paul Calvisi will have the call of the action as the offense and defense continuing with their position drills. A little bit later on, they'll go 7-on-7 and 11-on-11. But as we continue covering this Monday morning practice, 3 weeks now into Cards Camp 2019, and there's a lot to like, but there are some things, I know, MJ, that you're still waiting to see or maybe haven't seen enough of. And I don't know if there are red flags, but some areas in which this team certainly would like to address ahead of Week 1.
A lot to like. Obviously, Kyler Murray passes the eye test with flying colors. I like this entire draft class. I know they have 12 picks. I don't know if all 12 can make the roster, and that's probably a good thing when you start looking at, some of the areas they went out and got a free agent or two. I like the fact that some of these young guys are stepping up, guys like Chris Jones and Christian Kirk in his second year. And, but I just think when you look at this, to me, offensively, my biggest concern, it's not so much wide receiver, it's the offensive line. Who are the 5 starters, and then who are the 2 guys that are going to dress on game day, so they'll dress a total of 7. We have names, but are they comfortable with these guys going into the season, or do they try to go out and get somebody? There are some street free agents out there at offensive tackle. I like what the special teams has done, okay? And it's going to be a great competition between Damiere Byrd and Pharoh Cooper. Who's the better receiver? Well, Bird's got more speed. Cooper may be the better returner. So I like what I'm seeing there. My concerns is the depth on the offensive line, defensive line, and outside linebacker. And that, to me, I know we talk about next man up, but that's got to be something that they're going to have to address between now and the opener.
Well, 2 guys as far as outside linebackers, in addition to Brooks Reed, Pete Robertson, the former Texas Tech standout, who has a history with Kingsbury, and then Andre Branch, who has a history with both Vance Joseph and Charlie Bullen, former Miami Dolphins. He's someone that was brought in late here into training camp, and both those guys at times have seen first-team reps. I don't know what they do special teams-wise, but certainly they do have numbers at that position. It's just, do they like what they see at outside linebacker?
All right, 2 things come to mind when you mention that group. Can Brooks Reed hold up? Now he's practicing. That's good. He's going to play. That's good. Can he hold up? Because he would be your perfect rotation guy with Suggs. Now, the 4th guy, I think they would want to look for a guy like Robertson or Branch, where they're a little bit younger, but they're also going to have to play on teams. You're going to have to go down there and cover kicks and punts. So who's the 4th guy? Because I anticipate we're going to see 4 at least dressed on game day. You got to have some backups. So I think it's still open, and maybe that 4th guy's not on the roster right now. But they do. Kingsbury spoke very highly of Robertson today based on his relationship and how he's become a pro. So you can see that the maturity factor has kicked in since he met him.
Back to your special teams as far as the return, specifically punt return. Yesterday during practice, Christian Kirk, Andy Isabella, Damiere Byrd, Pharoh Cooper were on punt return. There have been moments in which Byron Murphy has also fielded punts, but so far to date, number 13 is back there. So as much as we think Christian Kirk is going to be your wide receiver, number 2 wide receiver, or some combination of number 1 or number 2, until otherwise told, special teams coordinator and assistant head coach Jeff Rogers is going to put Christian Kirk back there. And right now, he is your guy, or maybe your best option right now, unless someone says, hey, coach, much like Patrick Peterson, yeah, no more 13 on punt return.
Yeah, and the fact is, whether he's 1 or 1A, I think him and Larry are going to lead the team in targets and touches. You're talking about 60, 65 snaps a game. Does he play every single snap? No, because they're going to be shuffling in wide receivers based on if they go 4 or 5 wide. So we'll see after the first month of the season what kind of toll it takes on him, but he has the ability. If he didn't get hurt by the turf monster last year, he would have returned one for a touchdown. So he was close, but I think on paper he gives you your best chance to tilt field position.
As the team goes through continuing its drills defensively, certainly the Cardinals would love to see a much better effort, not only with tackling, but stopping the run come Thursday night. Kingsbury wouldn't bring it up to a concerning level, but it was interesting to hear him mention that the Chargers had 87 rushing yards on QB scrambles. We focused on the total, which was close to 180, and 56 yards on that first drive alone, but the number that stood out to him was the 87 on quarterback scrambles, something that they cannot allow to happen. And I'm not expecting Derek Carr to be a big QB scrambler on Thursday, but certainly that was something that really stood out to Kingsbury.
Yeah, we're going to see Nathan Peterman. He may run. I think he's better than people give him credit for. Yeah, I mean, listen, Easton Stick. Who? Easton Stick. He's more like Carson Wentz. Did you see how fast he ran? 31 yards. You can't have that. I mean, they're going to play some mobile quarterbacks this year, but I think his point was we just can't blame the defensive line.
Everyone's got to be where they're supposed to be and fill those lanes. Don't let, whether it's a quarterback or a running back, whoever's the ball, don't let them run free.
And if you're a linebacker or a safety or corner, you got to come up. You got to make that tackle. In other words, we sit here and go, well, they were getting gashed. But when he mentions that, though, and he did say Tyrod Taylor's been a starting quarterback in the NFL, and maybe he was going against the 2s and 3s, but you still want to be able to keep the quarterback in the pocket and don't let him beat you with his legs. And we got to face Russell Wilson. We're going to face the mobile quarterbacks this year. So, to me, I'm glad it happened. Now they can correct it.
Well, and until it does get corrected, it's going to be something people point to, and for good reason, because last year it was an issue not only in the preseason, but it continued all the way through the entire regular season.
Well, they were worse than football. You can't give up 150 yards on the game every week. I mean, that was the average, and that means you're trailing. Teams can just pound the football in the fourth quarter. Now they're playing against the clock, so that has to improve.
We continue here on this special edition of Cards Cover 2, covering Cards Camp 2019. For those that are still interested in training camp, one more open practice that is this coming Saturday, 1 o'clock. Go to azcardinals.com for all your information. And again, the second preseason game comes your way Thursday with the Raiders in town. 5 p.m. is the kickoff. Please download the mobile app for those with tickets, because the only way you're going to be able to get into the building is through the mobile app. Everything now is digital. And with that, we'll sign things off here on this Monday morning. Special thanks to those behind the scenes helping us out here. Jim Omohundro, Grayson Choi. For my partner, Mike Jurecki, I'm Craig Grialou. We'll talk to you on Thursday for the second preseason game, and then Cards Cover 2 back with you on Friday for a quick recap of the Cardinals and Raiders. Appreciate you watching and listening here on Cards Camp 2019.